candidate. Democratic Congresswoman and squad member Cori Bush has lost her primary race in Missouri, according to U.S. media projections. Wesley Bell, a St. Louis prosecutor, will instead be the party's candidate in the state's first congressional district this November. Miss Bush came to prominence as an organizer in the Black Lives Matter movement and, after taking office in 2021, as one of the squad of Democratic members of the House known for supporting progressive causes. She has been a vocal critic of Israel's war in Gaza, with pro-Israel groups spending more than 10 million, 7.9 million, on efforts to unseat her in the primary. Projections from both the Associated Press news agency and NBC News suggest Mr. Bell is on track to win the vote with 51% of ballots cast, compared to Miss Bush's 46%. The district is a strongly Democratic area, and Mr. Bell will be expected to hold it at the coming election. Almost all the money spent in campaigning against Ms. Bush reportedly came from the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC. AIPAC is a pro-Israel lobbying group and has vowed to spend over $100 million to unseat progressive lawmakers who have spoken out against the war in Gaza, Politico reported. It marks the second loss for the squad, a group of 9 progressive lawmakers in the U.S. House of Representatives, in recent months. In June, more than $15 million was put into a successful bid to oust Jamal Bowman, another critic of Israel, from his seat in New York. The figure was the most spent in any House primary in history. Mr. Bowman was ousted just weeks after he was censured for pulling a fire alarm while the House was in session. Speaking to CBS News, the BBC's US news partner, ahead of the vote, Mr. Bell accused Ms. Bush of not doing her job. "She is not working with others and it's hurting our district." Ms. Bush defended her record to the outlet. "My community knows who I am. They know that I'm going to fight for the people in the streets." Less than 2 weeks after the 7th October attacks, Ms. Bush introduced a resolution calling for a ceasefire and humanitarian aid. The attacks carried out by Hamas and other armed militant groups saw around 1,200 people killed in Israel and another 251 taken to Gaza as hostages. In response, Israel declared a complete siege on Gaza, cutting off supplies of electricity, food, fuel, and water. To date, more than 39,600 people have been killed during Israel's military campaign in Gaza, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Ms. Bush also boycotted a joint address to Congress by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in July, calling him a war criminal and saying he was at the forefront of a genocide. Dozens of House and Senate Democrats boycotted Mr. Netanyahu's address. In a statement ahead of the vote, Ms. Bush accused Mr. Netanyahu of perpetrating a genocide in Gaza and claimed Congress was actively celebrating his actions. Ms. Bush has also been investigated by the Justice Department, House Ethics Committee, and Federal Elections Commission for her campaign spending, mostly over allegations that she improperly paid her husband, a security guard, for protection. She previously said any claims she had misused federal funds were simply false. Share your feedback in comments. Subscribe to our channel. 4 hotel employees who allegedly pinned a man to the ground after he behaved erratically in a Hyatt Regency lobby in the U.S. state of Wisconsin are facing murder charges. Devontae Mitchell, 43, ran into a women's bathroom before staff dragged him outside, beat him, and held him face down on the ground for 8 or 9 minutes, according to court documents. Mitchell was unresponsive when police arrived at the scene in Milwaukee on 30th of June. He was later pronounced dead. He died of restraint asphyxia and toxic effects of cocaine and methamphetamine, found a post-mortem examination that also noted he was morbidly obese. Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office issued arrest warrants on Tuesday for the 4 now former employees at the hotel. They are 2 security guards, Todd Allen Erickson, 60, and Brandon LaDaniel Turner, 35, who was off duty at the time of the incident, as well as Devin Johnson Carson, 23, a front desk agent, and Herbert Williamson, 53, a door attendant, according to court documents. If convicted, they each would face up to 15 years and 9 months in prison. The incident unfolded when Mitchell entered the hotel and began running around, attempting to hide in places. He went into the gift shop, then a women's bathroom, where he tried to lock the door. Mr. Turner told police he heard women screaming in the toilet. Video surveillance footage showed hotel workers forcing him out of the bathroom and dragging him outside through the hotel lobby. 2 of them repeatedly struck Mitchell and another kicked him, according to the court documents. They are apparently heard in a bystander's mobile phone footage telling him to stay down and stop fighting. Mr. Erickson told investigators that Mitchell had tried to bite him. Mitchell is heard saying he is sorry during the struggle, according to audio from a video taken by an onlooker. One of the employees said Mitchell was having difficulty breathing and had been pleading for help, according to the charge sheet. Ben Crump, a lawyer representing the family, said Mitchell was in the midst of a mental health crisis, and instead of abiding by their duty to protect and serve, the security officers and other Hyatt staff used excessive force that inflicted injury resulting in death. Mitchell's widow, Deesia Harmon, told reporters on Tuesday she was grateful for the charges. "I just want everyone to be held accountable," she said. The company that runs the hotel, Aimbridge Hospitality, has previously said several employees were fired over Mitchell's death. With one viral line on cable TV, "These guys are just weird," Tim Walz vaulted into contention for the job of Kamala Harris's running mate. The 60-year-old brings with him a folksy, plain-spoken and sharp-tongued approach to taking on the Republican opposition. He also comes with a compelling resume: a public school teacher, football coach, and National Guardsman before he entered politics. His political experience, representing a Republican-leaning district in Congress and then later passing left-wing policies as Minnesota's governor, could have broad appeal at a time when American politics is so polarized. Teacher, football coach, congressman, a native of rural Nebraska, Mr. Walz farmed and hunted in his summer times and enlisted in the Army National Guard at 17. He would serve in the volunteer force for 24 years. His father, a public school administrator, encouraged him to join the military before he died from lung cancer when Mr. Walz was 19. The Minnesota governor has spoken of how Social Security survivor benefits sustained his mother and how the GI Bill paid for his college education. Armed with teaching degrees, Mr. Walz took on a 1-year teaching post in China around the time of the Tiananmen Square massacre. He later honeymooned in the country with wife Gwen Whipple and also organized summer educational trips to China for U.S. students. After returning home to Nebraska, Mr. Walz became a teacher and American football coach until his wife, another teacher at the school, drew him back to her native Minnesota. They now have 2 children. As a coach at Mankato West High School, Mr. Walz helped build up an American football program that led the school to its first state championship. He also earned plaudits for agreeing to be the faculty advisor for the school's Gay-Straight Alliance at a time when homosexuality was largely frowned upon. He first ran for office in a largely agricultural district that spans across southern Minnesota, which is fairly rural and Republican-leaning. But Mr. Walz campaigned as a moderate who cared about public service and veterans advocacy, leading to an election upset. Views and beliefs. Over his 12 years in Congress, it was hard to label his ideology. He voted in favor of the Affordable Care Act, co-sponsored pro-labor measures, including a bill to raise the minimum wage, and backed an unsuccessful cap-and-trade effort for reducing carbon emissions. But he also found common cause with Republicans. He voted to continue funding the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, supported tighter vetting of refugees entering the U.S., and tried to block the Obama-era bailout of banks and car companies after the 2008 financial crash. Once endorsed by the pro-gun National Rifle Association, NRA, which donated to his campaign, he spoke out in favor of an assault weapons ban after the Parkland school shooting and lost their backing. Mr. Walz won the 2018 Minnesota governor's race by more than 11 points, But his first term was overshadowed by the COVID pandemic and the killing of George Floyd by a police officer in Minneapolis. Republicans heavily criticized Mr. Walz for being slow to deploy the National Guard even as some protests grew violent. But the governor won re-election, and his second term has overseen a busy period with Democrats controlling the state legislature by a single seat. Democrats have enshrined abortion rights, enacted paid family and sick leave, strengthened gun laws, funded universal free school meals, and invested in affordable housing. The frenetic activity caught the eye of former President Barack Obama, who wrote, "If you need a reminder that elections have consequences, check out what's happening in Minnesota. These are weird people." Largely unknown on the national scene, Mr. Walz has quickly gathered buzz in recent weeks for his acerbic descriptions of Republicans. "These are weird people on the other side," he recently told MSNBC, a label that has been widely repeated. "They want to ban books. They want to be in your doctor's exam room." But Republicans have been quick to characterize what he has done in Minnesota as too radical for ordinary Americans. Tom Emmer, the third highest-ranking Republican in the U.S. House of Representatives, accused Mr. Walz of trying to turn Minnesota into Kamala Harris's home state of California. But allies, including labor leaders, believe Mr. Walz can broaden Ms. Harris's appeal to rural and working-class voters. Angie Craig, a House Democrat locked in a competitive race for re-election, praised Mr. Walz as a battle-tested leader. As a proven winner who has never lost an election across many tough races, she told the BBC she believed he would be the best possible addition to the Harris ticket. Kamala Harris has picked Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, as her vice presidential nominee. Ms. Harris wrote on social media that he stood out from the competition because his convictions on fighting for middle-class families run deep. Mr. Walz, 60, said it was the honor of a lifetime to join the Democratic ticket. Republican nominee Donald Trump slammed Mr. Walz as a dangerously liberal extremist in a campaign release. Mr. Walz will appear with Ms. Harris later on Tuesday at a campaign event in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, before the duo embark on a 5-day barnstorm through other key battleground states. The two will also speak at the Democratic National Convention later this month, from 19 to the 22nd of August in Chicago, when the Harris-Walz ticket will be formally coronated. Ms. Harris was officially selected as the party's presidential nominee by a virtual roll call vote that ended on Monday. U.S. media reports indicate Ms. Harris had not decided on her running mate until Tuesday morning. Her campaign vetted about a dozen people over the past 2 weeks before she settled on Mr. Walz. The former public school teacher and member of Congress is viewed by Democrats as somebody who can appeal to rural and working-class voters and help Ms. Harris win crucial Midwestern U.S. states. Announcing his selection on Tuesday morning, the U.S. Vice President shared details of his background, both because it's impressive in its own right and because you see in no uncertain terms how it informs his record. As a governor, a coach, a teacher, and a veteran, he's delivered for working families like his own, she wrote. "We are going to build a great partnership. We start out as underdogs, but I believe together we can win this election." During the vetting process, Mr. Walz drew enthusiastic support from pro-labor groups and his party's progressive wing. He also gathered buzz with his now viral description of Donald Trump, his running mate J.D. Vance, and Make America Great Again Republicans as weird. That characterization has since been adopted by several Democrats, including by Ms. Harris herself. Mr. Trump recently responded, "They're the weird ones." In a Tuesday statement, the Trump campaign slammed Mr. Walz as a West Coast wannabe who has spent his governorship trying to reshape Minnesota in the image of a left-wing California. "If Walz won't tell voters the truth, we will. Just like Kamala Harris, Tim Walz is a dangerously liberal extremist, and the Harris-Walz California dream is every American's nightmare," Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said. A source close to the vetting process told CBS that Mr. Walz was chosen for his experience and record of accomplishment in an executive role, his compelling biography, his ability to be a strong messenger against the Trump-Vance ticket, and his strong personal rapport with the vice president. As the current 2-term governor of Minnesota, Mr. Walz has overseen one of the most productive legislative periods in state history. With unified control of the state legislature, Democrats have enshrined abortion rights, strengthened gun laws, created new paid family and sick leave policies, and implemented a series of other progressive wish list items. But Mr. Walz has been heavily criticized by Republicans in his state for his response to the COVID-19 pandemic, but especially for his slow deployment of the National Guard in response to violent protests that erupted in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd in 2020. Before entering the governor's office, Mr. Walz represented a Republican-leaning district in the U.S. Congress for 12 years. He won that seat in 2006, the only Democrat to have won in the mostly rural district over the past 3 decades. The son of a public school administrator and a stay-at-home mother, Mr. Walz is a native of rural Nebraska. He grew up farming and hunting before joining the Army National Guard at 17. He went on to serve in the volunteer force for 24 years. The young Mr. Walz also taught secondary school students, first for 1 year in China, then back home in Nebraska. It was his wife, Gwen Whipple, a fellow teacher, who drew him back to her native Minnesota. There, he continued teaching as well as coaching football at a public high school. He has described his entry into politics as almost accidental. He said he volunteered for John Kerry's 2004 presidential campaign after being angered by an incident in which 2 of his students were turned away from a George W. Bush campaign event. Share your feedback and opinions in comments below. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching and supporting. Tim Walz touted his rural roots and said Donald Trump would take the U.S. backwards as he appeared for the first time as Kamala Harris's running mate at a raucous Democratic Party rally. At the event in Philadelphia on Tuesday night, the party's new nominee for vice president said their Republican rivals in November's election were weird as hell. The Minnesota governor spoke in front of thousands of supporters just hours after he was announced as Ms. Harris's pick for the role. The Trump campaign, meanwhile, was quick to attack Mr. Walz as a dangerously liberal extremist. The 60-year-old is billed as someone who could win back rural and working-class voters who have gravitated to Donald Trump in crucial Midwestern states. At the rally in the key swing state of Pennsylvania, Ms. Harris, currently the U.S. Vice President, said she and Mr. Walz were the underdogs in what is expected to be a close election, but had the momentum. She introduced her running mate as a fighter for the middle class, a patriot. Mr. Walz then recounted his small-town roots in Nebraska and his career as a National Guardsman and teacher before attempting to draw a contrast with Trump. He doesn't know the first thing about service because he's too busy serving himself, said the former Army sergeant and football coach. He got some of the loudest cheers of the night when he took aim at the former president's criminal record with chants of "lock him up" from those in the arena. He also sparked applause when he invoked a viral attack line that caught the eye of the Harris campaign as she considered who would be her running mate. "These guys are creepy and, yes, just weird as hell," Mr. Walz said of their Republican challengers. The pair mostly pitched themselves as defenders of individual freedoms, including on abortion rights and safety from gun violence. Mr. Walz showed the plain-spoken, folksy style that has won praise from Democrats, as he took a jab at Republicans on the issue of abortion access. "Mind your own damn business," he said, drawing an ovation from the crowd of more than 10,000 at Temple University. Ms. Harris and Mr. Walz have just launched a 5-day tour of key battleground states. They will also speak at the Democratic National Convention, which runs from 19 to 22 August in Chicago. As the current 2-term governor of Minnesota, Mr. Walz has overseen one of the most productive legislative periods in state history, implementing a sweeping left-wing agenda. Democrats have used control of the state legislature to guarantee abortion rights, pass gun control measures, and institute paid family leave. A source close to the Harris VP selection process told CBS News that his list of accomplishments for working families matched what Harris wants to do nationally, But Republicans have criticized Mr. Walz for Minnesota's mask mandate and a shutdown of businesses and schools during the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as his delay in deploying the National Guard to deal with rioting after George Floyd's murder in 2020. Also in Philadelphia earlier on Tuesday was Mr. Vance, Trump's running mate, who assailed the new Democratic White House ticket. The Ohio senator told reporters that Ms. Harris's choice of Mr. Walz shows that, when given the opportunity, she will bend the knee to the most radical elements of her party. Trump's campaign said in a statement, "Just like Kamala Harris, Tim Walz is a dangerously liberal extremist, and the Harris-Walz California dream is every American's nightmare." President Joe Biden, who suspended his own election campaign last month and endorsed Ms. Harris, said in a statement that the Democratic ticket will be the strongest defenders of our personal freedoms and our democracy. Another of the finalists to be Ms. Harris's running mate, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, was also at the rally. He had faced sharp criticism from the left over his support for Israel and his handling of college protests sparked by the war in Gaza. Some Trump advisers have expressed relief that Ms. Harris did not pick Mr. Shapiro because of concerns he could help deliver the pivotal state of Pennsylvania. Before entering the governor's office, Mr. Walz represented a Republican-leaning district in the U.S. Congress for 12 years. He won that seat in 2006, the only Democrat to have done so in the mostly rural district over the past 3 decades. Mr. Walz is a native of Nebraska and the son of a school administrator and a stay-at-home mother. He grew up farming and hunting and served in the Army National Guard for 24 years after joining aged 17. The young Mr. Walz also taught secondary school pupils, first for a year in China, a country he says he has visited about 30 times. He speaks some Mandarin. His wife, Gwen Whipple, a fellow teacher, drew him to her native Minnesota, where he taught social studies and geography and coached American football. Subscribe for more updates. As they walked out for the first time as presidential running mates on Tuesday night, Tim Walz turned to Kamala Harris and mouthed one word: "Wow." It spoke to the enthusiastic response from the Philadelphia crowd, but also reflected the unlikely journey that the Minnesota governor has been on over the past week. Few people had Mr. Walz on their early lists of possible vice presidential choices. But on Tuesday, the dark horse won the race. In a year when vibes have been everything in politics, on the economy, on the campaign trail, that is exactly what Kamala Harris has gone for: good vibes. The Minnesota governor has a Midwestern nice appeal, even when he is throwing political punches. His background, a teacher, a football coach, an Army National Guard enlisted soldier, broadcasts meat and potatoes Middle America, as does perhaps his balding, rotund, slightly disheveled appearance. All of this was on display here in Philadelphia. After noting that violent crime rates went up under Donald Trump, he added, with a smile, "And that doesn't even count the crimes he committed." He called the Republican ticket weird as hell, a label that has become a Democratic mantra in just a matter of days. And on the topic of abortion, he said government should follow a Midwestern golden rule: mind your own damn business. Mixing humor with jabs, and speaking openly of the joy he sees in Democratic politics, may prove to be a more effective way to convince undecided voters who were simply not convinced by the dark threat to democracy rhetoric the Biden campaign had been using. Mr. Walz's all-shucks affability stood in sharp contrast with other possible choices: the polished and ambitious Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro and Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, with his arrow-straight military demeanor. Mr. Shapiro served as the warm-up act for the new Democratic ticket, and he received a hero's welcome from his home state crowd. It was a reminder of what Ms. Harris passed over in picking Mr. Walz, a popular politician with a silver tongue from perhaps the most important state on the electoral map. Mr. Walz was a safer pick than the Pennsylvanian, however, whose criticism of pro-Palestinian protesters and support for using public funds for private schools prompted objections from key parts of the Democratic base. These risked reopening intra-party divisions at a time when Democrats were finally pulling together. And while Minnesota is not a battleground state, the Harris campaign may hope that Mr. Walz has Midwestern appeal in places like Wisconsin and Michigan, which will ultimately help decide this election. By taking a Republican-held House seat in 2006, Mr. Walz has already shown he can win round a significant number of rural and Republican voters, and Mr. Walz has proven adept at defending his record of progressive legislation in a way that moderates and independent voters can understand. He's also a native of Nebraska, which in 2020 delivered one of its electoral votes to Joe Biden. It's by far the smallest battleground, but in a close race it could be the difference between victory and defeat. Nancy Pelosi, the Democrat grandee who was so instrumental in persuading Joe Biden to step aside for Ms. Harris, has been gushing in her praise of the wonderful Mr. Walz. It is no surprise. His 2006 victory helped deliver the House majority to Ms. Pelosi as House Speaker, and to the Democrats for the first time in 12 years. Republicans are going to try to erase these early good vibes and replace them with a darker picture. The Trump campaign has already branded him a dangerously liberal extremist and a far-left lunatic. They point to his record in Minnesota of enacting left-wing social programs and accuse him of not doing enough to control the demonstrations that broke out after the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police officers in 2020. At the very least, Republicans may welcome not having to face off against Mr. Shapiro, who has a more centrist profile and might have given Ms. Harris a decisive boost in Pennsylvania. J.D. Vance, Mr. Walz's Republican adversary for the vice presidency, said the choice showed Ms. Harris was willing to bend the knee to the most radical elements of her party. Trump, meanwhile, said Mr. Walz will unleash hell on earth and open our borders to the worst criminals imaginable. But even if Mr. Walz provides a more inviting target for Republicans, making that rhetoric stick on his friendly meat-and-potatoes persona will be no easy task for the Trump campaign. Now, the newly minted Democratic ticket hits the campaign trail, with 91 days left until Election Day. That's easy, Mr. Walz said of the 3-month home stretch. We can sleep when we're dead. Share your thoughts in comment section, subscribe to our channel. The tech world is digesting a US judge's potentially seismic ruling that Google illegally monopolizes online search and related advertising. It took 4 years to get to this point, and Google owner Alphabet's inevitable appeal means the legal process is likely to carry on for some time yet. But already, the potential consequences of the judge's decision are being considered, ranging from cash fines to other more complicated remedies. The US government specifically wants structural relief, so what could that look like? Breaking up the band. The nuclear option would be to demand Google breaks itself into smaller chunks, a move US officials have not ruled out. Google is much more than just search. Just look at Android, a firm it bought for $50 million, £39.3 million, in 2005, which now runs on the majority of smartphones, or YouTube, a $1.65 billion acquisition in 2006, which now generates many multiples of that in revenue each year. The argument might be that all of these can remain under Google, but the actual search engine should be spun off into a separate business. That might cause consternation for Alphabet executives, but as long as Google remained the default search engine on devices, the average consumer would be unlikely to notice the difference. Any such move would certainly be met with years of litigation and regulatory bun-fighting, but it seems to be far more on the table than at any time in Google's history, said Gareth Mills, partner at legal firm Charles Russell Speechless. There will now be a separate hearing where the judge will have no option to consider the divestiture of Google from all or part of its search engine part of the business, or imposing other corporate governance controls to negate the anti-competitive conduct found to have already occurred. Google it. Another potential remedy centers on Google's practice of paying other companies to use it. The US said Google was currently paying firms like Apple huge amounts of money each year to be pre-installed as the default search engine on their devices or platforms. The judge agreed. The contention is, had Google never spent that money, the big firms might have been encouraged to develop their own search experience. Instead, Apple's Safari browser, for example, uses Google by default whenever you use it to search the web. If remedial action significantly affected Google's ability to pay other companies to use it, perhaps those firms might start a rival. Here, though, they would run up against Google's incredibly strong customer recognition for search. Despite its own high brand profile, it is hard to imagine telling someone to Apple something. The iPhone maker will, of course, be keen to keep the money Google rolling in, which, according to one analyst, amounted to $20 billion in 2022. Any disruption to the revenue stream will have significant implications for Apple, said Dipanjan Chatterjee from Forrester Research. As the case works through the legal system, and the likely outcome appears to be opening up search engine exclusivity, you can fully expect a brand as obsessed as Apple is about customer experience to have a plan B to ensure a smooth transition for its customers. Hard to shift. Something that's easier to imagine is some kind of choice screen, where people opening a browser for the first time are asked whether they'd like to use Google or an alternative like Microsoft's Bing. It is somewhat harder to picture that causing people to abandon Google in their droves, however, for the simple reason that for most people, it simply works well. Those of us with grey hairs will recall Google being one of several search engines to emerge at the dawn of the internet, with familiar rivals including Yahoo and Ask, formerly Ask Jeeves, and possibly less familiar rivals including Lycos and Alta Vista. But over the next decade, Google didn't just become the dominant player in the market, it became part of the way we speak. Despite Microsoft launching its rival, Bing, in 2009, nothing has yet knocked Google off its perch. Microsoft boss Satya Nadella testified in Google's trial, perhaps hoping a judgment like this could finally help give Bing wings. The court may seek other ways to dismantle Google's position as a default search engine, but some of those remedies likely go beyond the facts driving this case, said Professor Anu Bradford of Columbia Law School. For example, the EU is going further with its recent Digital Markets Act that forces even Google's own Android phones to present users with a choice screen that lets the user choose one's preferred search engine when setting up the phone. One question is whether this new ruling paves way for such regulatory demands in the future. It takes time. Whatever happens next, past experience suggests it won't happen quickly. Back in 1999, Microsoft found itself in a very similar situation to where Google is now. The firm had just been found by a US judge to have created a monopoly, and a year later a court ordered the firm to be broken up. Microsoft appealed the decision, and in 2001, the original decision to break it up was overturned. By the end of 2002, Microsoft had agreed a settlement with the US Department of Justice, which a judge accepted. But some US states disagreed, and it wasn't until 2004, 5 years after the original ruling, that the settlement was officially signed off. Share your thoughts in comments. Subscribe to our channel for more updates. Thanks for watching. A US judge has ruled Google acted illegally to crush its competition and maintain a monopoly on online search and related advertising. The landmark decision on Monday is a major blow to Alphabet, Google's parent company, and could reshape how technology giants do business. Google was sued by the US Department of Justice in 2020 over its control of about 90% of the online search market. It is one of several lawsuits that have been filed against the big tech companies as US antitrust authorities attempt to strengthen competition in the industry. This case has at times been described as posing an existential threat to Google and its owner, given its dominance of the search and online advertising business. It is unclear yet what penalties Google and Alphabet will face as a result of the decision. The fines or other remedies will be decided in a future hearing. The government has asked for structural relief, which could, in theory at least, mean the breakup of the company. In his decision, U.S. District Judge Amit Mehta said Google had paid billions to ensure it is the default search engine on smartphones and browsers. Google is a monopolist, and it has acted as one to maintain its monopoly, Judge Mehta wrote in his 277-page opinion. Alphabet said it plans to appeal against the ruling. This decision recognizes that Google offers the best search engine, but concludes that we shouldn't be allowed to make it easily available, the statement from the company said. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, the country's top prosecutor, hailed the ruling as a historic win for the American people. No company, no matter how large or influential, is above the law, Mr. Garland said in a statement on Monday. The Justice Department will continue to vigorously enforce our antitrust laws. Federal antitrust regulators have filed other pending lawsuits against big tech companies, including Meta Platforms, which owns Facebook, Amazon.com, and Apple Inc., accusing them of operating unlawful monopolies. Monday's ruling comes after a 10-week trial in Washington, D.C., in which prosecutors accused Google of spending billions of dollars annually to Apple, Samsung, Mozilla, and others to be pre-installed as the default search engine across platforms. The U.S. said Google typically pays more than 10 billion to 7.8 billion a year for that privilege, securing its access to a steady stream of user data that helped maintain its hold on the market. Doing so, prosecutors said, meant other companies have not had the opportunity or resources to meaningfully compete. The best testimony for that, for the importance of defaults, is Google's checkbook, argued Department of Justice lawyer Kenneth Dintzer during the trial. Google's search engine is a big revenue generator for the company, bringing in billions of dollars thanks in large part to advertising displayed on its results pages. Google's lawyers defended the company by saying that users are attracted to their search engine because they find it useful, and that Google is investing to make it better for consumers. Google is winning because it's better, said Google's lawyer John Schmidtlein during closing arguments earlier this year. Mr. Schmidtlein also argued during the trial that Google still faces intense competition, not just from general search engine firms such as Microsoft's Bing, but more specialized sites and apps that people use to find restaurants, airline flights, and more. In his ruling, Judge Mehta concluded that being the default search engine is extremely valuable real estate for Google. Even if a new entrant were positioned from a quality standpoint to bid for the default when an agreement expires, such a firm could compete only if it were prepared to pay partners upwards of billions of dollars in revenue share, Judge Mehta wrote. Another case against the technology company over its advertising technology is scheduled to go to trial in September. In Europe, meanwhile, Google has been fined billions in monopoly cases. Subscribe to our channel for more updates. Thanks for watching. At least 5 people have been killed after Hurricane Debbie slammed into Florida before weakening to a tropical storm. Debbie is expected to bring heavy flooding to parts of Georgia and the Carolinas in the coming days. The National Hurricane Center warned of a life-threatening flood threat as the slow-moving storm drops torrential rains. Debbie made landfall on Monday morning as a Category 1 hurricane in the Big Bend region of Florida's Gulf Coast. Authorities said the dead included a 13-year-old boy who was killed when a tree fell onto a mobile home in the town of Levy County, located near Gainesville. In Hillsborough County, around Tampa, an 18-wheel lorry veered into a canal during the storm. The driver was found dead. In Dixie County, just west of Gainesville, officials reported that a woman and a 12-year-old were killed when their car crashed on Sunday night. In southern Georgia, another death, a 19-year-old, was reported after a large tree fell onto a porch at a home in Moultrie, local media reported. The slow-moving pace of the storm could bring catastrophic flooding. Jamie Rome, the deputy director of the Hurricane Center, said, Debbie's waves and strong winds helped blow 25 packages of cocaine, worth more than $1 million, ashore in the Florida Keys, according to the U.S. Border Patrol. In Florida, some 150,000 homes and businesses were without power on Monday night, according to poweroutage.com. Another 36,000 residents in Georgia and South Carolina were experiencing outages. The storm is forecast to skim the coast, drenching southeast Georgia and the Carolinas on Tuesday and Wednesday, before moving inland near the South Carolina coast on Thursday. Before the storm made landfall, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis declared a state of emergency for 61 of Florida's 67 counties. Spiridon Ibeyaris told USA Today repairs on his Keaton Beach home had just wrapped up 2 weeks ago from Hurricane Idalia, a Category 3 storm that made landfall last summer. "Man, I've done this so many times," Mr. Ibeyaris said. Forecasters predicted this hurricane season, which runs from 1st June to 30th November, would be a busy one. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, said there could be up to 25 named storms in 2024. Between 8 and 13 of those storms could develop into hurricanes. Debbie was the 4th named storm of the year. It is thought that climate change may be making slow-moving hurricanes like this more likely. As the world heats unevenly, this causes changes in the atmospheric circulations that steer storms across the planet. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more updates. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas has been accused by a top Democratic senator of failing to disclose 2 flights on a private jet owned by a billionaire Republican donor. Ron Wyden, chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, said that Justice Thomas did not declare a round trip from Hawaii to New Zealand with his wife on Harlan Crow's private jet in 2010. He used a letter to Mr. Crow's lawyer to accuse the property mogul of showering a public official with extravagant gifts, then writing off those gifts to lower his tax. A spokesman for Mr. Crow told US media Mr. Wyden's inquiries had no legal basis and are only intended to harass a private citizen, and that Mr. Crow had always followed applicable tax law. It's concerning that Senator Wyden is abusing his committee's powers as part of a politically motivated campaign against the Supreme Court, said a spokesman for Mr. Crow, Michael Zona. Justice Thomas has not commented publicly on the letter. The Supreme Court did not immediately respond to an inquiry from the BBC. Justice Thomas has previously said that he believed he did not need to report trips with close friends who do not have business before the Supreme Court. It is the latest criticism against the conservative judge, whose previous travel on private jets and yachts have previously come under scrutiny. Under a new disclosure system, the judge in June amended his annual statement to include 2 trips with Mr. Crow in 2019, one to Bali and another to California. However, Mr. Wyden alleged in his letter that the judge had used private jets, paid for by Mr. Crow, at least 17 times in the last 8 years. The Oregon senator also cited a new trip that he said had not been reported publicly. Mr. Wyden cited U.S. Customs and Border Protection records of a trip from Hawaii to New Zealand in 2010 by the judge and his wife Virginia on Mr. Crow's private jet. The White House said Mr. Wyden's letter strengthened President Joe Biden's case for sweeping reforms to the court, which is currently dominated by conservatives. Mr. Biden last week proposed establishing term limits for justices, which are currently lifetime appointments, and an enforceable code of conduct. Such changes would be difficult to pass in Congress. The White House said on Monday that the most powerful court in the United States shouldn't be subject to the lowest ethical standards, and conflicts of interest on the Supreme Court cannot go unchecked. The heightened focus on court ethics has drawn scrutiny to other Supreme Court members. It emerged last year that Justice Sonia Sotomayor, a liberal, did not recuse herself from 3 cases involving Penguin Random House, which had paid her more than $3 million. Subscribe for more updates. Thanks for watching. U.S. President Joe Biden met his senior national security team on Monday as concerns of a possible Iranian retaliatory attack on Israel grew. Mr. Biden said he had been briefed on preparations to support Israel should it be attacked, while Secretary of State Antony Blinken said officials were working around the clock to prevent an escalation. Tensions have risen over the last week following the assassination of Hamas's political leader Ismail Haniyeh, for which Iran has blamed Israel and vowed severe retaliation. Israel has not claimed responsibility for the assassination. Numerous countries, including the US and UK, have also told their citizens to leave Lebanon, from where it is feared Hezbollah, an Iran-backed militia and political movement, could play a role in any response. During Monday's briefing, Mr. Biden was told the timing and nature of an Iranian attack remained unclear, according to US news site Axios. A day earlier, Mr. Blinken reportedly told his G7 counterparts that Iran and Hezbollah could attack Israel within 24 to 48 hours. In a statement released after the briefing, Mr. Biden said, "We received updates on threats posed by Iran and its proxies, diplomatic efforts to de-escalate regional tensions, and preparations to support Israel should it be attacked again." He added that steps were being taken to respond to attacks on US forces, in a manner and place of our choosing. On Monday, several US personnel were injured in a suspected rocket attack on a US military base in Iraq. Speaking to reporters earlier in the day, Mr. Blinken said officials were engaged in intense diplomacy pretty much around the clock with a very simple message: all parties must refrain from escalation. Escalation is not in anyone's interests. It will only lead to more conflict, more violence, more insecurity, he said. He added that a ceasefire would unlock possibilities for more enduring calm, not only in Gaza itself, but in other areas where the conflict can spread. It is urgent that all parties make the right choices in the hours and days ahead, he said. Earlier in the day, Mr. Biden spoke to King Abdullah II of Jordan about efforts to de-escalate regional tensions, including through an immediate ceasefire and hostage release deal, a statement from the White House said. A joint statement from the G7 also expressed deep concern at the heightened level of tension in the Middle East, which threatens to ignite a broader conflict in the region. No country or nation stands to gain from a further escalation in the Middle East, it said. Talks that had brought renewed hope of a ceasefire deal to end the conflict in Gaza have faltered following the events of recent weeks. On the 27th of July, 12 children and teenagers were killed in a strike on the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Israel accused Hezbollah of carrying out the strike, though Hezbollah denied any involvement. Days later, Fuad Shukr, a senior Hezbollah military commander, was killed in an Israeli airstrike on a suburb of the Lebanese capital, Beirut. 4 others, including 2 children, were also killed. Hours later, Haniyeh was assassinated in Iran. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, said Haniyeh was killed in a strong blast caused by a short-range projectile fired from outside a house where he was staying while visiting the capital, Tehran. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said in an interview with Russian state news agency RIA Novosti that the killing would have a negative impact on the ongoing negotiations. Israel has not commented on the assassination, but Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said afterwards that Israel had delivered crushing blows to Iran's proxy groups in recent days. Following the killings in Lebanon and Iran, the IRGC said Israel would receive a severe punishment at the appropriate time, place, and manner, while Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah said the conflict had entered a new phase. It is the closest the conflict has come to escalation since April, when Iran fired some 300 drones and missiles at Israel in response to an Israeli strike on an Iranian consulate in Syria that killed a number of senior military commanders. Flights suspended. On Monday, Jordan asked all airlines planning to land at its airports to carry an additional 45 minutes' worth of fuel, a move thought to be a precaution in case Jordan has to close its airspace in the event of a regional conflict. German flag carrier Lufthansa has suspended all flights to Tel Aviv, Tehran, and Beirut until and including the 12th of August. US airline Delta has also paused flights to Tel Aviv until at least the 31st of August due to ongoing conflict in the region. The UK Foreign Office currently advises against all travel to Lebanon and has urged British citizens in the country to leave. It also advises against all travel to the northern area of Israel that shares a border with Lebanon. The conflict in Gaza began following the 7th of October attack on Israel by Hamas and other militant groups, which saw around 1,200 people killed and another 251 taken back to Gaza as hostages. Since the launch of Israel's retaliatory ground invasion in Gaza, more than 39,600 Palestinians have been killed, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Hezbollah and Israeli forces have also exchanged near-daily attacks since the conflict began, with hundreds of people killed and thousands displaced on both sides of the Israel-Lebanon border. Hezbollah and Hamas are both backed by Iran and form part of what Iran calls the Axis of Resistance, a loose alliance of militant and political groups across the region that oppose Israel and its key ally, the US. Subscribe for more updates. Usha Vance is defending controversial comments made by her husband, Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance, about childless cat ladies, telling Fox News that she thought critics had taken the remarks too seriously. Mr. Vance initially made the controversial remarks in a 2021 interview. He argued those without children shouldn't be leading the country and that women who don't have kids are miserable. The comments resurfaced after former President Donald Trump chose Mr. Vance as his running mate. The backlash, from critics including the actress Jennifer Aniston, was swift, and so was Mr. Vance's defense of his words. Now, Ms. Vance has weighed in, telling Fox News that the remarks were a quip, and she wished people would look at the larger context of what her husband said. Addressing criticism that his comments were insulting to those who struggle with fertility problems, she said Mr. Vance would never, ever, ever want to say something to hurt someone who was trying to have a family, who really was struggling with that. She said she understands there are a lot of other reasons why people may choose not to have families, and many of those reasons are very good. Mr. Vance was a candidate for Senate at the time of the 2021 interview, which also happened on Fox News. He told former channel host Tucker Carlson that the US is run by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. He went on to question why a number of high-profile Democrats do not have children, including Kamala Harris, who is now running to replace Joe Biden as president. Ms. Harris is a stepmother to her husband, Doug Emhoff's 2 children. J.D. Vance argued leaders without children were making choices for the future, even though they don't really have a direct stake in it. He also said those without children live in small apartments, chase wealth, careers and status, and then end up hating those who have families and homes, whom he said are happier and better equipped to lead the country. Mr. Vance, who has 3 children with Ms. Vance, has since defended the remarks, particularly childless cat ladies, as a sarcastic comment in service of making his larger point. People are focusing so much on the sarcasm and not on the substance of what I actually said, Mr. Vance told the conservative media personality Megyn Kelly. He said his remarks were not aimed at belittling people who do not have children. Rather, they aimed to criticize the Democratic Party for becoming anti-family and anti-children, he told the host. Subscribe for more updates.